Welcome to Pastor Moses Kim's Sermon Remix. All the messages were preached to Grove Ministry congregation at Henry Church at Gloucester, New Jersey. And now let's invite our two hosts.
All right, let's dive in. We're tackling faith and inclusion today.
Sounds good.
We've got some really interesting stuff to unpack here, going deep into Acts chapter 8, specifically verses 26 through 40.
Okay.
This story's got it all. Unexpected encounters, ancient social structures, and it's a really powerful example of how faith can break down barriers.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned barriers because the setting of the story is so important. We're talking about the temple in Jerusalem,
Right.
a place that was deeply symbolic in so many ways.
Okay.
It wasn't just a place of worship.
Yeah.
It really served as this physical representation of all those social divisions of the time.
Okay, so paint us a picture. What did this actually look like?
Well, imagine like a series of courts, each one more exclusive than the last.
I see.
You had the court of Gentiles, the outermost area. Anyone could enter there.
Okay.
And then you move inward, you've got the court of women, the court of Israel, and then finally the innermost holy place.
Right.
And this layout wasn't just architect. Oh, interesting.
It mirrored the social hierarchy of that era.
So not everyone was welcome everywhere.
Exactly.
Got it.
And that's where the central figure of the story, the Ethiopian eunuch, becomes so compelling.
Yeah, tell me about him.
Well, not only was he a foreigner, which already limited his participation in worship, but he was also a eunuch.
Right.
And this meant he was excluded from the very heart of the temple,
Oh, wow.
the place where he longed to connect with the divine.
You know, it's really striking to me that he was a high-ranking official.
Mm-hmm.
He was in charge of the treasury for the Queen of Ethiopia.
Absolutely.
He had a position of power and influence.
Yes.
Yet he was still subject to these social barriers.
It's such a powerful reminder that even those in authority can experience this exclusion and marginalization.
Yeah.
And despite these hurdles, the text tells us that he was deeply devoted to his faith.
I see.
He traveled all the way to Jerusalem to worship.
Wow.
It showed his deep yearning for that spiritual connection. It makes his encounter with Philip even more significant then, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
not just a random meeting.
Yes.
It feels divinely orchestrated.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The text tells us Philip was guided by an angel to meet the eunuch on the road.
Only an angel.
And what's really fascinating is that the eunuch is reading from the book of Isaiah, specifically Isaiah 53,
Oh, wow.
at the exact moment that Philip arrives.
That's incredible. Talk about perfect timing.
It makes you wonder what was going through the eunuch's mind as he read those words.
Yeah, what was he searching for?
Perhaps he was wrestling with this concept of the suffering servant,
Right.
this key theme in Isaiah 53.
Okay,
This prophecy foreshadows Jesus' sacrifice,
I see.
and the idea that he would bear the sins of humanity.
Given the eunuch's own experience of exclusion, this prophecy must have resonated so deeply with him.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And this brings us to another pivotal passage, Isaiah 56,
Okay.
which directly addresses the inclusion of foreigners and eunuchs in God's kingdom.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of a radical shift in perspective, right? It flips the script on who belongs in God's family.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm curious, what does Isaiah 56 actually say?
Well, it says, and I quote, "Let no foreigner who is bound to the Lord say, 'The Lord will surely exclude me from his people.' And let no eunuch complain, 'I am only a dry tree.' For this is what the Lord says, 'To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, to them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters.'"
Wow, that's powerful. It's almost as if God is preemptively addressing the very barriers that the eunuch is facing.
It certainly challenges the existing social order.
Yeah.
Instead of exclusion, it speaks of inclusion.
Right.
Those who were once marginalized are given a place of honor.
That's amazing.
And this Old Testament prophecy finds its ultimate fulfillment in the arrival of Jesus.
So how does Jesus change the game?
Well, his death and resurrection, they break down the barriers between humanity and God. They fulfill the law and usher in this new era of grace and inclusion.
Okay.
The tearing of the temple veil at the moment of Jesus' death is so symbolic of this radical shift.
It's like the physical walls of the temple couldn't contain the boundless love and grace that Jesus brought into the world.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The old system, with all its exclusions and limitations, is no longer in effect.
So we've got Philip. He's been divinely led to the eunuch.
Yes.
They've discussed this incredible prophecy from Isaiah. And now the scene is set for something truly remarkable. What happens next?
Well, we learn that Philip explains the gospel to the eunuch, connecting the dots between the prophecy and the arrival of Jesus.
Okay.
And the eunuch's response is immediate and joyful.
Oh, wow.
He asks to be baptized right then and there.
He doesn't hesitate.
Not at all.
He doesn't need more convincing.
The text tells us he sees some water and says, "What can stand in the way of my being baptized?"
Wow.
It's such a beautiful picture of someone responding to God's grace with open arms.
And this brings us to a key point that we found highlighted in the sermon. God breaks down barriers.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your past holds. God's grace is available to all.
That's right.
This is so powerfully illustrated in the eunuch's story. He was excluded from the temple, yet God met him right where he was.
It's a powerful reminder that God often works outside of our expectations.
Yeah.
The eunuch sought God in the temple, but it was on a dusty road that he encountered the truth that would change his life forever.
Yeah, it really challenges our assumptions about where and how God chooses to reveal himself.
It does, doesn't it? And the sermon also highlighted that God uses people. And we see this so clearly in Philip's role here.
Yeah.
He was just an ordinary person,
Right.
but he was used in such an extraordinary way.
Yeah. Think about it. God could have chosen any method to reveal himself to the eunuch,
That's true.
but he chose to send Philip, a human being, to share the good news.
And it just underscores that fact that we all have a part to play in God's plan.
That's a good point.
You know, we might think, oh, I'm not qualified or I'm not capable, but God can use each of us in such unique and powerful ways.
Absolutely. This story really makes me think about the barriers that we might be inadvertently creating in our own lives and communities.
That's so important.
Yeah.
We might not have the same physical barriers as the temple in Jerusalem, but
Oh, right.
there are often social, cultural, or even emotional barriers that can prevent people from really experiencing that sense of belonging.
So how do we become more aware of these barriers? And what can we do to actually, break them down?
I think it starts with examining our own hearts and minds.
Okay.
Are we harboring any prejudices or biases that might be creating distance between ourselves and others?
Right.
Are we holding on to traditions or interpretations that might be hindering people from experiencing the fullness of God's grace?
Yeah, those are tough questions.
Yeah, are tough questions.
Yeah. But they're so essential if we really want to live out this message of inclusion
Exactly.
that we see in the story of Philip and the eunuch. The sermon also emphasized that joy and obedience go hand in hand.
Yes.
And we see this beautifully illustrated in the eunuch's immediate and joyful response to the gospel.
Right. You know, there's a sense of liberation and wholeness that comes with aligning our lives with God's will.
Yeah.
It's not about following rules out of obligation.
Right.
It's about surrendering to a love that truly transforms us from the inside out.
And that transformation is so evident in the eunuch's reaction to his baptism. He went on his way rejoicing.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just some, fleeting happiness.
Exactly.
It was a deep and abiding joy that flowed from a heart that had been touched by God's grace.
It makes me think about the transformative power of encountering Jesus. It has the potential to change everything.
Yeah.
Our perspective, our priorities, our very understanding of who we are and why we're here.
And that joy, that sense of purpose and belonging, is something that we can all experience.
Yes.
It's not reserved for a select few.
That's right.
It's available to everyone who opens their heart to God's love.
Absolutely.
This story also highlights a contrast between the eunuch and another figure mentioned in the sermon, Simon the magician.
Yes.
Simon also believed and was baptized.
Right.
But, his heart wasn't truly changed.
Yeah.
He was more interested in using his faith for personal gain.
Exactly. And that distinction is crucial.
Yeah.
It's not enough to simply go through the motions of faith. True transformation involves a change of heart, a genuine desire to align our lives with God's will.
The eunuch's story reminds us that authentic faith isn't passive. It compels us to action. Just as Philip was moved to share the good news,
Yes.
we too are called to be instruments of God's love and grace in the world.
And that call to action might look different for each of us. It could involve speaking up against injustice, showing compassion to those in need, or simply extending a hand of friendship to someone who feels marginalized.
There is so much to unpack here. But for me, I keep coming back to the idea that God's grace truly is for everyone. It doesn't matter our background, our past, or our perceived flaws. God's love extends to all who seek him with open hearts.
I think that's a beautiful way to sum it up.
Yeah.
And it's a message that we need to hear again and again,
Yeah.
especially in a world that can often feel divided and exclusive.
We hope this deep dive has given you a fresh perspective on faith, inclusion, and the power of a transformed heart.
Yes.
And as you go from here, may you be filled with the same joy and wonder that just radiated from the Ethiopian eunuch as he encountered the life-changing grace of God.
This podcast was produced by Moses Kim, edited by Moses Kim, intro music by French Fuse, and the outro music by Endless Love. Thank you for listening. See you next time.